Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Hello, Asher.
Good morning, Australia.
Good morning, Australia.
Start saying really random things.
Oh, I think I know what's going on. Hang
I
on.
haven't shaved in 7 days.
I thought you were going to shave.
I should, actually, but then I was like, oh, no, I'm in a hurry. So.
Should I wear something more fancy than a tank top? I don't know.
I mean, if you want to look like a hobo.
Stay in the tank top?
No.
All right, mic's working. We're
Actually, I'll get more hits with you in a tank
off
top.
to the races.
Don't worry, Asher. You get more hits with Sophie in a tank top.
No.
That's true. It's the internet nowadays, huh?
You won't believe what happened next. Clickbait. Are we looking at the camera or are we looking at you?
I think we can look at each other. Yeah, we'll try to ignore the camera
Okay.
as much as possible.
It's like you.
Unless we want to do asides to the audience and be like, guys,
Oh.
listen to that. I'll do that. I'll be looking.
That's
at
why. That's where we lean in.
Yeah.
I always find that weird in movies where they talk directly to the screen sometimes. It's very odd.
I just want to get the pronouncement of your last name really.
Fuerbringer.
Fuerbringer.
Fuerbringer. Yeah,
You got it.
man.
Awesome. All right.
There you go.
Bringers of the fear.
Are you guys ready?
I'm ready. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I like this. This is exciting.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast, coming at you from Canada, from the Fuerbringers house. This is Peter and Sophie, dad and daughter, and their beautiful wife and mum. Emma couldn't make it today, but here I am with them in the, what would you call this, the log cabin?
Yeah, we call it the cabin.
The cabin.
Yeah.
Now, if you've been following along on Instagram, you've seen some images of their beautiful property. It is one of the most amazing natural places I've ever been in. Super inspirational to wake up here and see the views of the mountains. And yeah, you guys are a really inspirational, nature-loving family that has got so much going on. And you're an entrepreneur, you've been in the military, you've raised an awesome family. You're out and about doing lots of work with horses that is really top notch, and agricultural college, and just passionate all around about nature. So I want to hear maybe first from Peter. Tell us a little bit about how you got into being a wild man
Wild man.
who loves nature and
Loves nature. It's funny, actually. Sophie and her sister Elena and Emma a bit tease me and say I'm getting soft in my old age, but I just look at the world and I think, man, we've been having a frat party on this planet for a little while, and maybe it's time we look after the place. And we certainly keep that as a major consideration, even in how we do business. We tend we do business online. That's our main sort of activity in the marketplace. But even the companies we partner with, we make sure that they're environmentally friendly, that they're treating the people with respect, but just taking care of the planet. And so what inspired me about Life Rocks is that, firstly, it's a clever name. Life rocks, right? But also rocks, which is cool.
I just want to mention John is the uncle of Peter, and he came up with the name Life Rocks. It's very smart.
It is. It's a good one. And I think that what you're doing with Life Rocks really lines up with anybody that actually wants to take a common sense approach to caring about the planet. We have this ranch here that we bought just about not even a year ago now. And even just the little things we're learning about is what's the impact of the trees, what kind of critters live under the ground, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Because we want to be stewards of this, and looking at Sophie and Elena as this is going to be one of their inheritances and whatnot, just making sure we're doing our little micro bit for the planet is important. So we love it out here. We love nature. We love the mountains. I grew up on partially on a big ranch just west of Calgary, and it's hard not to appreciate that and want other generations to have that as well.
Amazing. Yeah, something I noticed when I met the Fuerbringers is that they live by values, and strong values guide a family to a good place. And I think that's something that our modern society loses touch with a bit, is integrity and values. And you told me this story about a hill to die on, and that was part of the reason that you came out here. And I thought that was a really beautiful little story. Would you mind share?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Em and I, we decided to try to make our way in this world and maybe ditch the 9 to 5 in favor of maybe another mechanism and means of just building a life, right? I think that it's more about choices and freedom, and unfortunately freedoms are very expensive. That really guided our hand to the point where we actually moved more urban. We were living in South Surrey and then living in White Rock on the beach and that kind of existence. And we have a rule in our house called the Hill to Die On rule. Yeah. And really it originated as a way to help the girls stop arguing about dishes and stuff like that, because we noticed, sisters do. We noticed that they were like fighting, and so I'd walk over and be like, wow, for two people that love each other as much as you, this must be a serious problem. So you just go sit down. And clearly this is a hill to die on, so dad's going to do this. And they have a conscience. Or maybe if they weren't as nice as they were, the kids would be like, sweet. But they have a conscience, and they're like, oh no, Dad, it's fine. And so it actually just grew from there to the point where we have a rule in our house. If one of us calls hill to die on, that means it is extremely important. Everybody drops tools, and we do that thing. And so when Sophie was 16 and Elena was 14, we asked them that question. We said, what's your dream for the next few years? Because you're going to be moving out eventually and living your life. What can we do for you? And the girls said, we're sitting in this beach house in White Rock, Canada, on the West Coast. And the girls were like, we want horses. You've got to be kidding me. And so we're like, seriously? And they're like, yeah, that's our dream. And we're like, is this a hill to die on? And they were like, yeah, it's a hill to die on. And so we said, okay. And we sold the place there, and we bought our first little farm on Vancouver Island, which then led to a second farm on Vancouver Island. And we started learning a lot more about the stewardship and what it takes to have land and all the rest of it, to the point now where that's actually evolved into what was our dream and is our dream is Blue Rock Ranch, which is where we are now. And we have goals to realize out here as well. But that really just started because the girls said it was a hill to die on, and that's just a rule in our house. If it's a hill, and that what I like about it is that people don't get wrapped up over small things. Yeah. I think people that call hill to die on every little thing, nobody takes them seriously anymore. Because everything's exactly, like they cry wolf all the time.
So when did you realize that your parents were doing things a little bit differently, and that they were different?
Absolutely. I would say from about the age of 10 is when they really started to make a number of different decisions, in so much as they had lived more traditional lives before then. They'd gone to school, they got good jobs, and entered into prestigious careers, I would say, or things that people would certainly say is a good path to go down. But I got to see them go through this transition where they'd started out doing everything by the book, quote unquote, but then really start to make some different decisions because they weren't achieving an outcome they were excited about. Because they wanted time together as a family, time they got married to be together, and wanted to not always be living paycheck to paycheck, all of these things. And I think that's when they really decided to take a step back and look at, hey, why don't we learn from people that actually have the outcomes in life that we want? Okay. And so that was the time things started to change. So about 12 years ago now. It's hard to believe how fast the time flies. But it was neat for me, and I would say my sister as well, growing up, because we got to see them not only shift in that mindset, but also then apply a different way of doing things. And so when I was 16, they sat down with me and said, hey, we'll be in full support of whatever you do, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical. And I was like, darn it, that takes all my best options. drug dealers out.
Business is out.
Can't believe it.
So you had to go with plan Z.
So I had to, But they said, why don't you actually just take the time to write down the goals you have for your life and actually make them a little bit more specific, in so much as who do you want to be character-wise? Yeah. What do you want to do in terms of experiences? What do you want to have, the material side of life? And for me, that was horses and ranch. And then who do you want to help? The impact piece of the puzzle. And when I took the time to actually sit down and write down goals in those categories, I just knew that I wanted to follow in their footsteps in so much as creating more flexible means of being able to pursue my passions, be a good steward of the environment, but do it on my terms as well, without having to always be part of the typical 9 to 5, if that makes sense.
That is really cool. That is really cool. So you've seen this guy grow a lot.
I have, a lot of changes.
And you've seen this girl grow a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We're tremendously proud of the girls, but we've also looked to take advice from people that had great outcomes with their kids, and I think sometimes we don't evaluate the fruit on the tree. Yeah. And so that's been big for us, even lifestyle-wise. I think sometimes when you want an outcome that may require creation of some wealth, it's very easy to get focused on the wealth part and not the lifestyle part when you look at who you're taking advice from. And we really looked for the 100% solution. We call it living our life in one room. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the time, individuals, they build a life where work them would never want their kids to work them. They're almost like two different people in these different environments, or 3 or 4 different people. We just wanted to be able to be the same human being no matter what environment we're in, and that was the value system we were chasing. So that's what the girls have experienced and seen us fail consistently, and still to this day we fail a lot. But what's been really rewarding is watching their character development. I love the fact that both the girls are not turning their passions into prisons.
Yeah.
Which is really easy to do, I think, in today's day and age, where people are saying, follow your passion and make an income out of it. I'm like, that's great if that's for the next 45 years of your life and you're chasing a middle class income or middle class outcome, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way.
Sure.
That's totally fine. If I was going to do something for 45 years, I'd better like some part of it. Whereas maybe if you're trying to condense that process a little bit by being a little more outside the box, so that then you can pursue your life on whatever terms you want, then all of a sudden those passions can, if they make money, that's great, but at least you're not forced to make money at them, which I think can take the joy out of it. Yeah. And that's something we talk to the girls at, even just in terms of how they create cash flow, how they build their economic life, is do things that work, that are legal, moral, and ethical, but don't get caught up on status, don't get caught up on all these other things. Yeah. Just create a life where you have the time to actually invest in relationships, invest in your own health, be around for the environment, and maybe acquire things that can let you be a steward.
And I'll touch on that little piece of the puzzle there where you talked about us watching you guys fail a lot over that period of time. And I would say what's neat as a child watching your parents grow through this period of growth is it's one thing if they were to fail and then give up on that original goal that they had set. But I think because you watch that, like I was able to watch you guys maybe set goals and not achieve them, but then never give up on the goal and keep working towards it. I think that's in some ways is more inspiring more than if you had just set a goal and achieved it straight off the bat. It was that constant, hey, we might not have achieved it just yet, but we're going to keep working on that. And I think that really applies to anything. That's
really beautiful. I think that people continue along the same path a lot for fear that if they give up or if they stop doing the thing that's worked a little bit, then everything's over. But then it ends up that it was never enough for them anyway to get to where they wanted.
Yeah.
Like you said, the thing about the middle class thing, and there's nothing wrong with that, but most people who are in the middle class don't want to be there as well. So they're not really getting the result they want, but they think that if they stay to the straight and narrows, that someday somehow it's going to end up as a different thing, but it's a risk. So you took a risk at this sort of, maybe it was 10, the girls were 10 or something like that. What was that moment of stepping into that threshold for you where you said, actually, we've got to do something different?
I think sometimes people go through maybe like that emotional pivotal moment in life, and they can choose to ignore that and just carry on with the 50% solution, which is what I call it. Or they can use that moment to almost galvanize them and crystallize on the fact that there's got to be some sort of different process involved. And I think for us, I was gone from home with my military career because I started in the pilot trade and then I moved into the Army and communications after that. Yeah. I was gone for almost 18 months once, and with very little in between that. And what I started to do was look at the outcomes of the people who were ahead of me. And hey, I appreciate the service. I have nothing but respect for, I still serve. I'm that weird guy that doesn't have to do it for the money anymore. And I still serve in the military. Yeah. And so I get it. But what I was noticing was some of the family outcomes that I was seeing achieve from individuals 15 years ahead of me weren't my dream. Yeah. And so I'm not saying they're bad or good, but I got married once to stay married. Yeah. I wanted to be home and actually have a relationship and raise my own kids instead of their friends raising them at school. Yeah. And so those were outcomes that we wanted, and that's why we really worked hard to identify association, like people who had those outcomes, so that we could learn from their emotional experience of success. Because a lot of the time, I think when we talk about success on any level, we focus on the academic side of it. And a lot of people will tell you how to succeed at things who have never actually succeeded at the thing they're telling you how to succeed at. Yeah. I remember with one of the companies we owned, Emma owned one of the top 100 fast growth companies in the country, and she was ranked as, top 10 actually, it was number 7. And she was ranked as one of the top female entrepreneurs in the country. And I remember an individual would come in and was like, hey, I'll help you franchise. And she's like, okay, great. And how many times have you done this? And the individual was like, I've never done it, but I've got all the coursework and everything. So, hey, this conversation is over because I'm the one that's going to have to walk through this. If you've never done the thing I'm about to do, then I'm sorry. And so we've always pursued relationships with people who are in the hot pursuit of some sort of outcome that we want to experience. And it's because of that emotional experience that they get in the navigating the challenges. Because success on any level, whether it's with the program that you guys are building right now or in our experience even, the emotional side of that is what I think derails people the most. Okay, yeah. They feel unsuccessful. They feel rejected. They feel like inconvenienced. I find inconvenience is one of the big things. And to the point where they start eroding like their goal set to the point where they just go back to what they were doing before. Yeah. And what we learned was that firstly, when you make a commitment, you need to stick with that commitment. And the torture is when you continually revisit it. Maybe I shouldn't have, and all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's really the
burn the boat.
That's a challenge. That's a challenge we have in life now, is that so many individuals just refuse to truly commit to a better outcome. And that's why, look at how many people want to get fit.
Right.
There's no rarity of people that want to get fit. How come less than 1% of people who set a fitness goal in January achieve it by December? Is it a lack of a gym? Is it a lack of running shoes? Is it a lack of what?
Yeah.
And I just think it comes down to change one habit, but they don't take a picture of the holistic piece. So it's, I got a gym membership, they go for a month, then all their friends aren't fit, so they start doing what their friends do. Rather than saying, okay, I've got the gym membership, I'm going to make new friends with people that aren't sitting having a barbecue when they have spare time, they're probably out mountain biking or something like that. I'm going to get a personal trainer or somebody who looks fit, as well as knows the stuff behind it, right? So they've got an emotional experience and actually following through. I'm going to start reading books that talk about how food interacts with my body. All of a sudden now I'm addressing the goal on so many levels that it's almost inevitable that you're going to achieve it. You do that for a year, you're going to get fit. And I think it's the same with different things like how you raise your kids and how you approach your marriage. Best advice I ever got on marriage was always find what's right with your spouse and not what's wrong. Focus on what's right, and same with your kids. So just a couple of tips that have helped come in handy.
Watering the garden, not always shouting at the plants.
Oh, I like that. I totally, I'm going to grab that one. What's going on?
I think mentoring and role models are so important, and I always think about how as children model whoever's around, for better or for worse. Adults think that they're autonomous, self-contained units, but they still model whoever's around, just like children do, but they forget that that's a skill that is useful for life, and they think, I'm an adult now and I'm a self-contained thing. And they give up on finding mentors and people older than them. Often they've been in the role of the parent, so it's like they've become the authority, and then that ends for life. They don't get any more teachers or this or that. So I think that's awesome that you went out there and humbled yourself to the greater wisdom of people who had a life that you aspire to in the various departments. Like you say, in the military, that some of the guys that were ahead of you weren't getting the outcomes that you wanted. Who were some of those people? Do you want to have some people that inspired you?
Yeah, 100%. The first people that really inspired us was, and they're probably not names you would have ever heard of, right? I call them positive influencers. They use money as a tool, not as a scoreboard.
Okay.
And this couple, Mike and Leslie, they were really early influencers for us. They were the first ones that took us seriously. They were from South Africa and come here with nothing and have built this wonderful life. And the only reason we knew them is because my wife, who I wish she was on this podcast right now, had the presence of mind to ask a friend who the most successful person they knew was, and she said, I know this couple, and Emma's like, give me their number. And the friend's like, no, you can't just do that. Emma's like, I sure can, because she's British. She'll do whatever she wants. And that's how we met them, and had to get through my own skepticism of like, why would people help us do stuff? And so that was the first couple. But
boldness goes a long way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's my friend Dan and his wife Sandy, and they're on the West Coast. And they have been tremendously financially wealthy, successful for 33 decades. But the life they've built, the way they treat each other, like, it's inspiring. And so they were really big influencers for us. And to be able to call an individual like that up at any point and say, hey, I have a decision to make, what would you do? And they always said, it's never about permission, Pete, it's about perspective. And mine that wisdom and experience. And it's interesting you said sometimes going to people that are older than you. What I've learned is that age has sometimes little to do with it, because we think just because someone has experience that they're wise. But what I've learned is it's actually people with evaluated experience. And sometimes those people could be young. Oh my gosh, the amount of things that I'm learning from you, Asher, and I probably have a few years on you. But you've got a lot of evaluated experience in your life, even just the conversation you were having over the table today. So I really think that sometimes what we have to look at is individuals who evaluated the experiences they've had. And so my friends Greg and Lori, amazing influencers. Greg's the one who the way he treats Lori is, he gave me every great one-liner I have in terms of find what's right with people, all these little things, because I just saw the way that he moved through a crowd and just the amount of respect people had for him, and I wanted to create a life where people had a reason to respect me like that. And then honestly, John Roundtree, my uncle, he's one of the most influential people for Em and I early on. He was the only one that encouraged us down this path. I can't tell you how many people told us that we were crazy, that we should just stick with our game plan, and what's wrong with a career, all that kind of stuff. Because as soon as you try to do something differently, all your friends that are doing the thing that you're trying to get away from see it as almost like a challenge to their choices. And you're like, hey man,
survival threat.
Yeah, it's like, it's cool. I just want a different outcome. But it was Uncle John who I had the privilege of spending a couple months with him in Australia, and he just gave me these incredible one-liners that inspired confidence. He said, success in life, Pete, depends on how well you make plan B.
Yeah.
I love that. And he also said, strive to do something excellently and the rest will take care of itself. And the way I read that statement was, be careful what you strive to do excellently, because you will get the best result of it. You better dang sure hope you want that result.
100%. Wow.
Yeah.
So my Uncle John, and when we had opportunities come our way, he was literally the only person that was like, you should do that. I'm like, here's the guy who has a life that I want, and and is giving me this advice, and I'm just like, you can't learn tennis from a golf pro, so I'll learn tennis from a tennis pro.
That's
Thanks,
amazing.
Uncle John.
Absolutely.
I don't know, so do you have any that you want to add in there?
I would say all of those are the same for me, because those are all people that I would say were positive influencers in my life through you guys, because you guys learned to be great parents from a lot of them, as well as I had the opportunity to have a time with Dan and Sandy and Greg and Laurie and Uncle John as well, because one specific story about Greg and Laurie was on my 16th birthday, we were going to go down and do a little trip to California, because this was this point where I was making some decisions around what I wanted to do in the future.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into next. So.
Yeah, and so we'd gone down to the States, and we knew they lived in California at the time, Newport Beach, and so we'd asked if maybe
highly recommend it.
Yes, it's amazing. But we'd asked if maybe we could spend a little bit of time with them, but to have watched them just completely set aside an entire day. Greg took Dad and I out on the golf course to one of the nicest courses in the area. Lori took Mom and my sister out on a shopping trip, and just to have been so incredibly generous like that. I think not only was it incredible to have time with them, to pick their brains and ask lots of questions, but to also have seen what it's like to be in that position, to be just so generous and be like, hey, that's the sort of future I want, where I can do that for someone else. And so I would say, I don't have anything to add to that list, but just those same people, both through you guys and also personally, they've been massive influencers for me as well.
So the Kardashians weren't?
No, I can't say I've ever watched that show.
Tell us about your influence of nature and how that awareness dawned on you, and then how that led you to horses, and just share your passion there.
Absolutely. Like Dad said, when it came to the hill to die on, I was golfing quite a lot, but I'd always had this passion for riding. We'd grown up doing the riding lessons and everything, and when we'd had that opportunity to move over to Vancouver Island and finally own horses for ourselves.
Because that's a big nature spot for people who don't know. Vancouver Island is
amazing.
Massive. Yeah, it is such an outdoorsy community, and it's pretty underpopulated as a whole for the island, and which is really nice because there's just so much space if you want to go up hiking, exploring, fishing, boating. There's a lot of that there, and so it was just a really neat opportunity to have been able to move over there, start a small little hobby farm at the time, and buy horses. And I would say that's really where that passion of mine grew. And then when it reached the point where I had graduated from high school, I had a decision to make. I had been offered a position at UBC to go into their science program, and as much as I knew I probably would have enjoyed the content of a program like that, and a lot of people I respected in that profession, it wasn't the lifestyle I wanted. I didn't want a future in a lab coat. I wanted to be outside enjoying nature, and
nature's lab.
Exactly. And it was more, again, related to the outcomes that I wanted for my life, which were quite clear to me thanks to the questions Mom and Dad had asked me. So instead I made the decision to go to agricultural college and took a really great program at a place called Lakeland College, where it was a neat setup because not only did I learn the kind of behind the scenes of running a ranch, from accounting and economics and all of that, I actually got a lot of hands-on experience, like doing basic veterinary. I got to bring a horse with me and learn to train it over the course of the year. But then there was also a really big focus on learning how to go in more of a direction of sustainable agriculture, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there that ranching and farming, all of these things are bad for the environment, whereas that's not actually entirely accurate. It's how it's done. Same with anything. There's good and bad everywhere. And so if you do these things in a sustainable way, they actually are super positive for the environment. I'll take an example of, there's a massive national park down in southern Alberta, for hundreds of years there was a keystone grazing species, which would have been bison. But then over the years, as colonization happened and everything like that, we didn't have as many bison around. And so the keystone grazing species actually became cattle. But again, with the perception of cattle being bad for the environment, on this national park, they said they took away all of the grazing leases, and so said no more cattle are allowed to graze this land. And you actually, over the course of, I believe it was about 8 years, they saw the health of the environment of this national park plummet. All of it, it was crazy.
Pause here for a moment, because I want to ask. So the justification there was because the cattle are foreign species. Is that essentially it, or is it that they have different behaviors that they deemed?
Yeah, so I don't know initially exactly what was the reason why they decided not to, but I would say part of it was just seeing probably more of a concern of overgrazing, and therefore, which is more of the side of ranching where it could be seen as negative for the environment. So if you have too many cows on a plot of land where they overgraze it to the point where it can't recover, in that sense, then it isn't so good. So I think they were maybe trying to balance it, but they went too far by taking them completely off the land, as opposed to, hey, maybe if we do this a different way, have fewer cattle based on the size of land, so that it actually helps everything grow. Because what they found is, as the cattle started to graze again in a sustainable way, not overgrazing, what it did is it allowed the rejuvenation of the grasses and all of that, which increased biodiversity. And so the health of the national park, once they brought the cattle back, actually got a lot better. And so it's based on, it's really just how you do something. It's not doing it entirely, I would say. And yeah, it was a great program. I learned a lot, and it definitely was something that lined up more with the goals I wanted for my life, as opposed to just being stuck in a lab coat, that's for sure.
100%. And how much of the curriculum would you say was hands-on as opposed to the more the book stuff?
I would say about 50%. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, we did have some classroom times for sure, but a lot of our day-to-day was what we would call labs, and so we'd be out working with cattle, working with horses, doing all of the more hands-on stuff, which I found not only helped in terms of learning, but also was way more applicable then to once we left school, because that's what you would be doing, the hands-on stuff.
It was interesting actually, because Em and I had a traditional. So Em and I had a traditional schooling experience where we went and did the university thing and multiple degrees between us, and it was really interesting for us to watch this program at Lakeland College, how it worked actually, because they actually learned like the business of agriculture. Like the school itself had created sustainability even within their programs. They had a big dairy barn. So these students are actually doing the job, but also learning the science behind it. So it's not just do the job, it's learn the science as well. And
it's a nice balance.
We've actually started following like through Instagram and other things like that, but actually ranches that sustainably, that run their operations sustainably. One's Alder Spring Ranch, they're fantastic.
Joel Salatin?
No, I don't know Joel Salatin.
Oh yeah, he's one from Texas. He's
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, real cool guy, but
That's good. And actually I love this when we can exchange like this, because then you learn about something you didn't know.
Totally.
And but I've been watching a lot of Alder Spring stuff, and just the way they sustainably ranch, and that we're not planning to have a big cattle operation here or anything like that. We will have horses, and we've got a horse operation, and just even the way they interact with the land is going to be important. And I think that's why, because I'm also a former educator, right? I used to be a school teacher before I joined.
You got a master's in teaching as well, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. I went to the Master of Teaching program at UC. And University of Calgary, sorry. And so what I thought was interesting was the way your program, I'm going to totally jump into Life Rock's program that you have, because when you guys put that out in front of us, I just thought, how cool is that it's interactive for young kids. And I know that this is about life in general and other topics as well, but just the program behind it, as an educator, I was like, man, this is what I would have wanted for my students, because I used to teach that way, because it teaches the science behind how we interact with the planet. And I'm learning that in reverse. Sophie came forward into it through the way she went to school, because it's great the way they do things at Lakeland. But those of us that want to interact with the land in this capacity, I always find it funny that people who live in land covered by concrete are trying to tell people who live on actual land how to do things. And I find that like the most ironic thing ever. Not to be out there, but I'm just going to say it, man. There's that.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And, to speak to that little point, a little funny aside is that, let's say the vegan is upset about animals being killed, but the farmer that's farming the food for the vegan has to protect his crops from animals, usually with a gun or poison baits. This is what goes on. It's the inevitable facts of nature, and it goes over the head of the urban dweller who's not in touch with the processes of the land like we are, or people who do that sort of thing.
And to me, it actually also goes beyond. It's even just in the way that we, like governments and things like that, I just don't understand, or at least I think it would be better if rural people had more representation. So they had more voice at that level, because usually it goes by populations. Even just the concentration of decision makers are usually centered on a constituency that are going to be in the concrete jungle. It doesn't mean that they're not caring about the environment, doesn't mean they're not educated about it. But the individuals who actually live on the land have less of a voice in that, and it's something that I like that you're bringing into schools, because it raises up a generation who's actually aware. So they can make decisions. I'm living on the West Coast. When I started looking at fishing practices in certain countries and stuff, it actually really upset me. I was like, oh my gosh, this this is serious business. So I actually
Yeah.
got started to get educated about that because I was shocked by what was happening. And so I
Exactly.
think that also made us want to be more aware on our ranch
Oh, yeah.
about how we do things. Because I just would rather be part of, hey, okay, so fine. Something really silly. Bees they have their little larvae underneath the grass and stuff like that. So why don't we just leave the leaves down? Something
Yeah.
as simple as that.
Yeah.
It goes into our thought process now.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much richness there in the world to understand nature, and I see a lot of modern ideals taking away common sense and health from children. One of the things that we speak about a fair bit on this show is that the vegan approach, just coming back to that, of that then being enforced down to a child, where we've got no evolutionary history of this practice, and it's usually coming from a place of morality or ethics rather than anything that we've done historically as a human race.
Yeah.
And is that because of the mum's philosophy? And I'm not blaming people here, but we are saying that there's people who are in touch with the land, see these things, see the forest from the trees, and the heavy environmental approach to children can scare them out of doing things that actually come quite naturally to them. Just a little aside here, in terms of brain development, the amygdala gets developed through the ages of 3 till about 7, and unless that child has ever had a positive association with the death of an animal, because they've been in a culture that sees a positivity coming from the death of an animal, such as sustenance or the cycle of life or providing to a community, they're going to have a negative association for the rest of their life. And because we've got a culture that's so fixated on feelings as opposed to values or as opposed to decisions, then if you feel bad, then that equals true, which means veganism equals good.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, where it comes from. Speaking as someone who spent 8 years as a vegetarian and 2 years as a raw vegan.
Wow. I was like, say I'm vegan between meals, so.
Yeah, that's a good saying. That's a proper rancher saying.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that even just educating people on where their food comes from, like understanding the process of it is important. You talk about even just the farming practices that are used for certain crops. But I think people understood what the cost was of that almond milk, for example. It might make them think differently about what those choices are.
Yeah.
Just like the water intensity, for example.
Okay,
you know,
yeah.
of almond farming in a place that doesn't have a lot of access to water.
Okay, yeah.
And the stress that's putting on the water cycle, or the reserves, the water reserves.
Yep.
Learning that certain agriculture can happen in certain places and maybe shouldn't happen in other places.
Yep.
Look at
That's a good point.
I don't want to get on a rant here, but I just
Rant,
look at how the
rant
Dutch.
away.
Okay, look at how the Dutch do things, right?
Yeah.
The Dutch are one of the top producers in the world of produce and things like that.
Okay, yeah.
And yet they do it on small, little, tiny parcels
Sure.
of land, right? And
Yeah.
because they have different techniques with the way they use greenhouses. Like, it's amazing to watch
Yeah.
actually how much volume of food they can
Productivity.
produce in such a small parcel of land. And I know with any solution, everybody's going to argue that there's this problem. That's fine, I get that. But I'm just looking at the results of that going, okay, so what about if we even in North America learned how to farm that efficiently, how much biodiversity could be returned to nature and things like that. So I think there's all these opportunities to learn from great practices and
Yeah.
just challenge our way of thinking. And even the food choices, but from the end user, if they just understand the cycle, then even the types of food they choose may have some impact on the environment too.
Yeah.
Because they might go, I'm going to choose this because of X, Y, and Z rather than choosing that.
Yeah.
Like, I tend to try to, even like my choices in terms of fish and things like that, I tend to choose things.
What did you serve me up for lunch?
Yeah, moose. We had moose today, didn't
I
we?
had
Yeah.
moose today.
Moose today. It was
Where did
delicious.
you get it?
I got it from my friend who shot it. So actually, he was a bow hunter.
There you go.
So he got it and he gave us some of that. And my dad's always been a hunter.
Yeah.
You know, he worked for that big ranch in Alberta, and we had elk all the time, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
And anyways, whether people approve of that or not, if food does come from someplace, I think it's about not having cruelty involved.
Yeah.
But I think also in farming practices, I think that people should be thinking about where their food is sourced.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
As just consideration.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say on those topics?
No, I just 100% agree that, again, there are a lot of misconceptions and there's for sure good and bad everywhere, but it's just understanding that there is a lot of good. And if we place more of an emphasis on doing things the right way as opposed to getting rid of entire sectors of the marketplace that are actually extremely valuable and can do a lot of good when done the right way, I think that we'll find a lot more success in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally right. Role models of nature, role models of environment and interaction. And so there's a guy Peter Andrews in Australia, shout out if you end up seeing this, but his plot of land is green and lush and beautiful, and he's spent a lot of his life watching nature. How can I interact with nature in a seamless way where I'm actually just giving a helping hand, not this top-down, I'm the human with all the brains approach. And his property is lush and green, and both of his neighbours are brown, dry and deserty.
It's really funny you mentioned that. There's a fantastic documentary on Netflix called The Biggest Little Farm, and it's very similar, and it talks exactly about farming, and they have everything from a selection of different animals to growing different crops to an orchard, but they built this farm while interacting in a natural sense with the environment around them, and it's the same idea. It's lush, it's beautiful. When there was flash floods that came through in California, everything stayed because they had ground cover, as opposed to all these other farms around them that got totally washed out because they had no ground cover. And so it's a very similar idea, and that's a fantastic documentary.
And what do you think it is that inhibits the other people who stay with their dry farm from...
I think it's because it takes a lot more work to have even throughout the length of this documentary. It took them 7 years to create this farm, this ecosystem, on this farm where it all worked, versus they could have cut corners, they could have used pesticides, rodenticides, all of these other things, which would have allowed them to yield a crop sooner and probably a greater crop. So it takes a lot of dedication, it takes time, it takes learning from the right people. And so I would say that's probably one of the main factors that inhibits a lot of, especially larger producers from doing that on a regular basis.
I would also add that there's a legacy mindset involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because if you actually go right back to the original mindset, it was probably more in line with what Sophie's describing. We've turned agriculture into such a corporate entity now that the scale with which it's being approached, the family farm, is going out the window to a large extent. And there's a mindset to approaching things from an industrial perspective. It's chemical based, it's this based, it's whatever, right? Just how much can we get rather than what's the long-term impact of these choices? What's the
quality of it?
And what's the quality? Exactly. And look at the health issues people are having these days, right? I think that there's that mindset that a lot of people just refuse to challenge because it's common. And we see it in everything. We see it in the way people choose their lifestyle decisions. We see it in terms of parenting decisions. We see it in terms of decisions in relationships. All these kind of things. There's always this legacy mindset that if it's not addressed or open to a better idea or open to, and I use the word common sense, then we can get lost, and that's just the way it's always been done. We'll only entertain one type of logic instead of being open to looking at like a spectrum of different approaches with which to choose an approach that is in line with maybe our value system, or even a value system that takes into consideration our global community, things like that.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
So, anyways, just a couple of thoughts, I think.
Absolutely.
I'll add.
And piggybacking off of that, I would say one of the main values that I find is maybe lacked, especially over the last few years, is a loss of reasonable debate. Because how do we learn anything from each other unless we're able to reasonably debate different topics and accept that people come from different perspectives? But if you can explain, oh, this is why I believe this, or this is why I believe that, we can all learn something from each other. But if we shut down any opportunity for debate, that's where the loss of any growth happens. And so I think that's really important as well.
We go down a lot of alleys on this one.
That's a good one. That's a good one. No, it is true. I think that there used to be a saying that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And it seems like we're getting closer to a culture now where people take words very seriously, like they're these atomic bombs. My feelings are the most important thing in the world. And our feelings are important, but healthy debate is more important.
Absolutely.
And steel sharpens steel, and it's important to, and I imagine especially important as a family. I'm part of a family as well, and I know that we have heated debates sometimes about this and that, but it gets us to a better place. And it's my mum is a great debater. We've had some great debates, over our time, and I can take my hat off to Mum for helping me to develop some of those skills, as it's not always comfortable, and that's okay. That's part of the process. You got to have some grist in the mill to to make flour, so to speak.
Absolutely.
I think, like you said, I think really sometimes I find that people debate and argue just to hear themselves speak, rather than actually consider another perspective. The best advice I ever got from one of my professors actually at university, and this was just about being a reasonable human being, he said, try to prove yourself wrong, and if you still believe what you believe, then at least you've truly challenged your perspective. And the number of people that are unwilling to even go down that road, as soon as you have a difference of opinion on something, whether it's about how nature works or approach to whatever, I find that there is a large sector of individuals that are open to the discussion. But then there's another large sector of individuals out there that just simply will not entertain anything that at all challenges what they want to believe about the world. And that is where I think reason goes to die. Yeah. When we can't sit down, two people have a healthy conflict discussion about a topic and still shake hands and be friends. I love my parents-in-law for this one. Aubrey and Margaret, two amazing people. I hope you guys see this, because I've seen them be those people that can have a tremendously differing opinion from another human being, but still realize that it probably represents only 1% of out of the 100%, it's this little disagreement, it's 1%, the 99% of things we probably agree on, and be able to maintain healthy relationships. And I know over the last number of years, what I refer to as the blip, we've seen an erosion of relationships, we've seen an erosion of reason, all sorts of things, because people I find that we're starting to lose that a bit.
Yeah, the years that shall not be named.
That's what it is. Yes, we shall leave that.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the human experience that we all share has common things. We want clean air, fresh water, good relationships, great food, good conversation, get to dance to some music and head out and do fun things every now and then. And all of the politics and the different opinions and this sort of thing, at the end of the day, as you say, is that sliver. Yeah. And we don't want to lead with that stuff too much. So that's a really good point there.
I believe it, yeah.
So let's do some back and forth. What's some of these family values that you've got packed behind the scenes? And we'll just go one for one.
We have a saying in our household that love is unconditional, but respect is earned. And that's something that we've talked to the girls a lot about. It's, hey, there's nothing you can do will make me not love you. And we wanted to create a baseline of security in them that they would know they were always loved. However, our actions determine what we're respected for. Yeah. If you're a person of your word, then great, you will be respected for that. If you're a person who can learn to be emotionally consistent, then you will be respected for that. So that's something that's really driven our house a lot, is that little saying.
Yeah, I would say another big one is always resourcefulness, but having integrity behind that resourcefulness. I know there were many times growing up, and when my sister and I were younger, and we did something, and the conversation behind that is you were like, I'm not even upset that you did this thing. It's the fact that you didn't look around the corner and you weren't resourceful in terms of your thought process around making that decision. And so even just, taking the time to think something through and to think through the consequences of, is this worth it? Is this a hill to die on? As we talked about earlier. So that resourcefulness, but then making sure there is a basis of integrity behind that. It's not just being resourceful and getting one over on someone as well. Yeah.
Wow, cool.
I think another big word that we throw on in our family a lot is resiliency. So resourcefulness, absolutely. Yeah. I just noticed that highly successful people were tremendously resourceful. They'd figure it out. If they had to duct tape it together, they'd find a way. But resiliency was another one where you can take a knock, something not go the way you want it to go, and yet you still continue to move forward. You don't sit on the couch and eat bonbons for a month. So, okay, that happened. And I call this turning curses into blessings. Yeah. There's always two ways to look at a situation. You can either look at the curse side of it, which I find a lot of people do. There's a blame culture out there where they're like, I'm not this because of that. Yeah. Whereas I find there's another perspective I call the builder culture, which are individuals that turn that curse and go, here's 5 outcomes that are positive because that negative thing happened. And bad things happen, negative things happen, but there's a resiliency there. Picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, not looking for some sort of label or something like that for why X didn't happen. And then moving forward with, I love what Donald Rumsfeld said, we go to war with the army we have, not the army we wish we had. And that's on a personal level, that's on all sorts of level. And so I think that resourcefulness was something we talked to the girls a lot, and it was also talked to us a lot. Yeah. We had people in our life that when we were not being resourceful would say, or we're being resilient, they would say, hey, until you learn to be more resilient, you will not achieve the outcomes you want. And we're like, And hey, we didn't create the rules for success, but you certainly learn how to follow them in any avenue.
Absolutely. I'd say another one that comes to mind is kindness. And this is something that I know when you and Mum were starting down the path of thinking about how to do things differently, a challenge that Mike and Leslie threw out to you was to say to do one kind thing, say hi to 3 new people you don't know every day and say one kind thing. And so kindness is a big one for us, but it's not about being a doormat, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to help them get what they want most, not just what they want right now.
Right.
And but always having that underlying basis of how can I add value to the people around me. That's a big one.
Yeah, the kindness one's interesting actually, because that challenge that my friend Mike gave me, he said, say hi to 3 people you don't know every day, do one kind thing. And in fact, that was the cost of his time.
Yeah.
He said, if you don't do that, we're not talking anymore. And I was like, oh, this is for real.
Wow.
And so what was interesting with that little statement, and I know the girls have looked at that too, is because it's inviting new relationships into your life. I find in North America, especially, I can't speak to other cultures, but we have a backyard culture.
Yeah.
It's unless people are like invited into your home, then you would never see them.
Sure.
And so that advice that he gave me, and the girls do this too, it's actually fun watching them, invites the possibility that there's other people out there that you should meet. We call it the 3C rule. Every day, every person that crosses my path, I have 3 possible C's. One is a compliment.
Yeah.
Maybe they're in my life just because I was meant to brighten their day with a compliment. I look for something good about somebody. Find that thing. What is it? Maybe what their superpower is, what their genius is. Just maybe they look up together. They have nice shoes. I don't know. There's always something.
Yeah.
Number 2 is a companion, and that might be a friendship.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just meant to be a friend with this person. Maybe that's why they're in my life today. Who knows? Right? And the third one is a collaborator. Maybe this person is somebody that I'm meant to collaborate with on something. Maybe there's something I'm working in or an outcome that I'm working on that maybe they're working on. And unless we learn how to ask better questions, then I find we get stuck with relationships that are only based on our history instead of being open to relationships that could be based on our destiny. And so that was just something that we've thrown around in the house a lot as well.
Yeah, how do you make a new friend unless you actually take the chance to make a new
friend? Yeah,
whereas
exactly.
you'll forever be, again, you're a product of your association. You'll always be in that same sphere, which is sometimes a bit of an echo chamber too. How do you challenge your own bias? How do you learn new things? All of these things I think are interconnected with going out there and making new connections.
Wow, that's great. I really like that one. And I like the fact that when I ask this question, you're both like, yep.
Oh man, you should have dinner and play board games with us.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we talk a lot.
We play, and I think that's why I hope for everybody that they have a life where they have time for relationships.
Yeah.
Like Sophie's a tremendous golfer, right? I just love the fact that we were able to build a life where I've been able to spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours searching. I cheat horribly when I play golf with her because all I want to do is walk beside her.
You're a great caddy.
I'm a good caddy. My balls are always off in the bushes, so I'll just drop another one next to her so we can keep our conversation going because her balls are always on the fairway or the green. But just a life where relationships are at the center of it, and I love the fact that we've been able to have a life where, if we have lunch, it's the girls asked us if they could go to online school. I love technology that it gave us that option because then we had a flexible life together. We'd sit down, we'd play cribbage and talk, or some game of some description.
What is cribbage?
Cribbage is a card game.
Oh yeah.
North Americans probably know what that is.
It's a great game.
Or other board games or just other games. And we'd always be almost over meals, always playing game, but also talking about each other's day, talking about what we've learned. And because we've made personal development part of our day, that was the person. I do 15 minutes at least of listening to an audio that raises my game. I do 50 minutes of reading in a book that raises my game. That's just part of our everyday. And then obviously being open to coaching and mentorship with people we trust. We invite that in every single day. And so do the girls, actually, that we find we have interesting things to talk about because we're fully engaged in life.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, even in, I heard a statistic once, I don't know if this is right. Somebody's like, that's not true. Fine, whatever.
Sure.
This is what I heard, from a stage once, is that in any marriage, the first 7 years of that marriage, couples tend to speak for about 3 hours a day. Like some communication for about 3 hours a day. After 7 years, that goes down to between 7 and 15 years. It goes down to about 45 minutes a day of actual communication. Yeah. To the point where at that 15 to 21 years afterwards, they start having days where they don't even communicate with each other. And I believe the reason that is because life becomes so routine. Yeah. What the heck are we talking about? We're stuck on the logistics of the life. It's, did you get the kids to soccer? Yeah. And we know everything, and because we've almost stopped growing. Yeah. And I think that's why people get so involved in social media because they're looking for some sort of validation and whatever. Whereas what I like is that we've constantly faced the fact that we're okay with sucking at something because we want to learn. But when you're in a learning phase, whatever that is, or evolving towards maybe a dream that you might have for the future, the conversation's just better. Em and I, people joke and say, oh, were you guys newly married? I'm like, no, we've been married 23 years. But she's the hottest woman I've ever seen in my life. I'm madly in love with her. Just chase her around the table all the time. Yeah. I know.
Still right here.
But dream life, huh?
Yeah, but it's because
you work at it.
And also because we're constantly putting something in front of us that's that next level of dream.
Yeah.
And so that kind of relates to everything here. We had pictures of this 10 years ago
Christmas
in our
ranch.
phones, and the Christmas ranch we used to call it,
So
right?
you
One
dreamed
day.
this up together as a family.
Yeah, and what's nice is now with time, and that's why I really hope people pursue time outcomes, you start to be able to be even more considerate about some of the things that we were talking about, even environmental stewardship and all that kind of stuff. Because I think by no fault of their own, people live such a fast-paced life now that they don't even have time to consider things that have a longer-term impact.
Yeah, time outcomes.
Time outcomes. So I think that a time outcome is where we look at the economic drivers in life. Okay, so everything to me is an economic mechanism. It's whether it's a job, whether it's a small business self-employment, some sort of scalable something, or investing, whatever. It's all just a mechanism. And each of those mechanisms has an outcome. And those outcomes, if I want to be the best person at my job ever, that's great, but I will never have a time outcome. The outcome will always be active because I'm constantly in a rental position of my income stream, my resources, right, to live. Whereas if I start thinking about, okay, how do I create a time outcome, which means I need to think differently about the economics of my life. I need to be open to new ideas. I need to get to know people who are independent in that area and people who maybe have a thick skin and a soft heart still instead of the thin skin and the hard heart. And I find there's a lot of people that have thin skin, hard heart instead of the other way around. Just identifying those relationships so that you can build a life where time is the most valuable resource.
It's one thing you don't get back.
People used to ask me, like, what do you do? And I'm like, anything that gets me more time with the people I care about.
Wow.
What's up? And so that's why I take great interest in people who had time and great interest in how they created those outcomes. And not the get rich quick type stuff.
Sure.
Because I find get rich quick is the fastest way to get broke quick.
Yeah.
But there are genuinely individuals that you can learn from that have those outcomes. How do they do it? And I find that it's more of a mindset shift than it is a skill set shift. And that's the challenge because the middle class mindset is all around skill set. I have to go to school. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to get a skill set. Whereas when I got around people who had time outcomes, it was actually a mindset. Just the way they think about the economics of life, the way they think about what they value.
Totally. There's more freedom in that mindset.
Absolutely. And it's something, it's a garden that needs to be watered.
Yeah.
So that's my quick answer to time outcomes is find opportunities that create time outcomes, not just a title.
And thinking about those time outcomes, you have 3 budgets in your life. You've got the time budget, you've got an emotional budget, you've got a financial budget. And when any one of those 3 are depleted, it starts to steal from the rest. So you think if you have no time, that time budget is gone, it'll start to steal from that emotional side because then maybe you're worrying about not having time with family, or the financial side because maybe you try to get more time, but then you're not working as much. And so you've got to manage these 3 budgets in your life. And that's why I'd say those time outcomes are so important.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like the story that we tell the youth is, oh, go have fun while you're young and this sort of thing. And there's a truth to that, but the frame in which we've put it is totally wrong, which is that you've got energy when you're young to be in touch with your dreams, that you pointed your children to the right direction of saying, hey, who do you want to be and what do you want your life to look at? And it's funny you say that because that's what I said should be a subject at school. You walk into the classroom and on your desk is a sheet of paper that's blank besides a question at the top that says, what kind of person am I? And on the next sheet of paper is, what do I most want my life to look at? And you spend 45 minutes a day at school writing down the answers to that. I'll tell you, you'll probably leave school in a week. That's probably what would happen.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that because Em and I do a lot of public speaking now and on these kind of topics and whatnot in terms of just...
I'd love you to fill us in on your business because, tell us what you're up to now.
It's tremendously it's not as interesting as one would think, but I'm very simple in business. But what the interesting part is people actually.
Yeah.
People you get to interact with and stuff like that. But one of the things that I just wish they did at school as an educator, a former educator, is ask students how they want to live their life.
Yeah.
We need to stop asking, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? That's a question of some sort of protective pursuit that may or may not lead to a lifestyle outcome we want. I love what Sophie said, and she downplays it, but she's tremendously good at sciences. And would have been welcome in any university, I'm sure, for her prowess in that.
The professor was inviting her along.
Yeah, and she's earned a lot of people's respect in that, just in not just the human being that she is, but also her mind. I wish I had her brain. I just love what she said. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a lab coat. So she found another way to take her interest in education, her desire to learn, and create a more applicable, not applicable, sorry, that's not the word I'm looking for, but maybe a more functional way of expressing that in connection with her interest in agriculture. And I think a lot of the time we're so busy focused on, I need this degree or I need that or whatever. I think that's going to make me happy. It never makes you happy. unless you define the outcome you want, the lifestyle outcome you want, then you have no idea about what mechanism to choose.
So true.
If I want to live a life of time, but I never think about the fact that I want time and choices, and I'm going to choose mechanisms that don't create those outcomes because they're the most convenient. It's the low-hanging fruit. But if I actually design the outcome first, and then I go, what are my choices? What I believe people will find is that there's far fewer options than they think there are, and it makes the choice easier. So if I want to go from Calgary, Alberta to Airdrie, Alberta, with very short distance, I can take any number of vehicles. My choices are all kinds. I can take a skateboard, car, whatever.
Yeah.
But if I want to go from Calgary, Alberta to Sydney, Australia,
Yeah.
I have two choices.
Skateboard or
just
pogo stick.
a pontoon skateboard, a boat, or a plane. And if I want to do it in an accelerated time frame, like 48 hours or 24 hours, I have one choice. It's a plane. And regardless of whether I like planes or not, it's the way I get from A to B. And I find that even in the economics of our choices, of the mechanisms we employ, if we don't know the outcome and the size of the outcome, we get distracted making all these little peripheral choices that are based on what's the flavor of the day instead of what's actually creating the outcome that I want.
Wow.
To focus our efforts.
Super cool.
So there's that.
That's so true. Yeah, and we've got to create the life that we want. Luck is only given to those who prepare for it.
Yeah.
And I see you guys as very lucky, but I also see you a hardworking family, and I look forward to when we get Emma on here as well. She's a real firecracker.
Yes, she is. She is a fan favorite.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you asked us about in business and things like that. Em and I, we've done things that were never even close to our education.
Okay.
We got into the e-commerce space, and the only reason we got into that space and turning consumer habits into an income stream, if you want to think of it simply like that, it was because of the outcomes of people we knew that were doing that.
Yeah.
And actually, it wasn't even that we just looked at their outcomes and then evaluated what they were doing. We went to those people and said, hey, based on your outcomes, if I wanted to get an outcome like you in your relationship and all these other areas, what would you do?
Oh, yeah.
And that's how we came into that whole world. And a number of years ago, when maybe 1 out of every 10 people might have shopped online, we just decided to go for that. And we've really tried to check our ego at every step, because I think egos can be one of the most expensive things you ever own.
Yeah.
The faster you drop the ego, the more you're open to opportunity and all this kind of stuff. And that's why I have such a deep appreciation for Emma, because she checked her ego very early. Here she was, a trained lawyer. She could have gone off and had that big career. And yet we got into the nitty-gritty of just building an online company. But we did that not because of a fascination with the internet or anything like that. We did it because we met great human beings who were willing to mentor and coach us to create the same outcomes and actually invest in the relationship. So we're very collaborative in how we do business now. Yeah. We are on the side of it where, if somebody's truly motivated and they truly want to create an outcome, they don't need to be convinced to succeed. Those are the kind of individuals I have so much time for, whether I collaborate with them and help them create outcomes, because I like outcomes where the two parties have to win together or not at all.
Yeah.
And that's very different. And it's almost like people say it's a win-win and stuff like that. But I genuinely, like, when I invest in maybe a new entrepreneur or something like that, helping them build their own business of some description, I only get my outcomes if they get their outcomes. And that's why we're very thoughtful about where we invest that time. I want everybody to be successful, but people have to choose themselves.
Yeah.
You can't want it more for somebody than they want it for themselves. So that's how we approach things now, and we try to bring the value system into it. And really the conversation is, for us, it's around developing character at the same time you develop cash flow. Because I find a lot of the time people can develop great wealth, but that's not the secret to happiness. If being wealthy made you happy, then rich people would be happy. We know that's not true. Oh my gosh, the same goes for celebrity. If being a celebrity would make you happy, then celebrities would be happy, and that's not true. I find it amazing how many people are like, I want to be an online influencer, and they think the achievement of that somehow is going to create happiness for them. It's, my gosh, look at the outcomes of people who have that. Unless they know who they want to help in life, unless they have purpose behind that, it's not, you don't arrive at happiness.
Yeah.
It's something you bring with you.
Yeah.
Sorry, rant.
Great, man. Guys, I'm very valuable. You are very valuable.
Agreed.
I'm very appreciative. I'm very appreciative of your valuable time today. I'd love to ask you some questions just to wrap it up.
Sure.
One would be, what would be your advice as the leader of a family and to the parents out there who are looking at down the barrel of, they've done things a certain way, but they know they want to fry a bigger fish or go for that next level, but they feel uncertain, unsure, and not really knowing how to guide things there?
I think that I think that things always look more difficult when you're right at the beginning of it. And I love the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think sometimes people forget about the compound effect. We think that we have to do really big actions. And it's almost like we do these big actions, but we do them inconsistently, so they never really yield the result we're looking for. Whereas if you did 10 push-ups a day, you're probably going to get a much bigger result over time. So I would say to those individuals, start with something. Start with little steps. One little step, just tiny little incremental moves in the direction of what you want. Identify people that inspire you, but that are reachable to you, that you respect, and not just one-dimensionally, not just, wow, they have a lot of money. Hey, how are they in relationship? Are they living your dream in some capacity? And take their advice seriously. I would say look for mentorship and coaching. And I'd say be tremendously open. Sure, not illegal, immoral, or unethical off the table, but sometimes when I have an individual approach me and ask me like, hey, what do I need to do to succeed in things? Or I really want this outcome. I'm like, okay, let me ask you a question. If I told you credibly, and I can make the argument that shoveling wet dog poop into a bag for 2 hours a day, wearing a tutu on a street corner in front of all your friends would get you the outcome after 2 years that you're looking for, would you do it? And we've got a studio audience now.
We do.
Cool? And if they say yes, then I start to believe them a little bit more. Because I think people are quick to make commitments over a latte. Oh yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? And then as soon as they hit any kind of resistance or any kind of inconvenience, they throw their hands up. And one thing I tell people, my person that are looking for those outcomes, I say, number one, I promise you frustration. I promise you inconvenience. But I can also promise you success if you're willing to follow some very small rules, right? Which are just understand that these little actions done consistently are going to add up over time. Just be willing to do that little bit every day. Choose your mentors wisely. Choose your association wisely. If you're a parent, tell your children what the dream is. Let them be part of that. With Sophie and Elena, we used to come home and the house would be spotless when they were really young. And our friends used to go, why are your kids cleaning the house? And we're like, because they know what it means when the house is ready to go so that we can focus on what we need to focus on so that we can build the dream for our family. So it's little things like that. Work like a team.
Yeah.
And so that's the advice I would give is it's more of a mindset than anything else, but the mindset leads you to opportunities.
Fantastic. I love that advice. I would like to welcome John and Susan into the room.
Hey!
You're on film.
There you are.
Really?
This is a video
that, did you?
podcast.
Why would we be on film, for heaven's sake?
Because this is a video podcast.
Watch what you pull out of that bag. It's on record now.
So we've already covered that John was a major inspiration to Pete in his career and direction and taking risks, and obviously Susan, his mother, being a massive inspiration and beautiful woman and person herself. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Sophie,
Yes.
do you have any closing advice for one to maybe someone who's stepping out of college, they feel the pressures of stepping into a career, they don't know what to do, and this sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest piece of the puzzle is just be really clear on what those lifestyle goals are that you have. And these things are going to grow and change as we do, of course. But if you at least have the coordinates to put into the GPS, you can get the right route to get started on. And again, like Dad said, if you're not so process focused, you're more outcome focused, you can therefore pick the right opportunity that will get you to where you want to go. And you can have these passions and things that you love, but if you find other ways to take care of the financial side, then you can really pursue these passions you have and work on things like taking care of the environment, all of these very important aspects of life. But if you don't have make it clear what you want, then you're never going to be able to ultimately get there. And then I would say on the flip side, the other thing is look at the lifestyle of people 10 to 20 years ahead of you in any given area that you're looking at, maybe any career path or opportunity in general, because then you'll be able to, again, make a really educated decision on, hey, do they have the life that I want?
Yeah.
And identify people in the marketplace that do have the outcomes you want. And like Dad said, there's this idea of 360-degree success. It's not just one area, because maybe sometimes people have financial outcomes, but maybe not the relationship side or the time side. Look at all these different areas and identify what's important to you, and therefore it'll make making decisions coming out of high school, I think, a lot easier. Yeah.
Wise words, Sophie.
We listen to her, actually. That's all we do. So,
She's your family Buddha.
pretty much, yes. She sits and meditates.
Yes. Hours.
Or
On top of the horse.
That's right.
Yeah,
Out
exactly.
in the woods.
Exactly.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And until next time, everybody, life rocks.
Life rocks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.